So hello everyone, and welcome to this Mishcon digital session. MDR Cyber is the cybersecurity practice of our firm, which helps our clients with cybersecurity, incident response, and digital investigations. And today we're discussing the personal implications of managing cybersecurity, a relevant topic given the Uber indictment we all saw recently, and the way in which the world seems to be very much focused around who does security, not just what they do. I'm joined by Becky Pinkard, who is the CISO from Aldermore Bank, Lorraine Dryland, who is the CISO of First Sentier Investors, and John Baines, who is the Senior Data and Protection Specialist from our firm, Mishcon. Big welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for giving us your time today and for joining us. I'm really looking forward to this kind of chat. So perhaps we could talk about what some of the broad implications are for having the responsibility of cybersecurity, in particular in that kind of CISO role.
I think in terms of the, like you said, implications for it, I'll default back to my favorite answer in security, which is it depends, right? Eventually people will get sick of me saying that repeatedly, but I just, until it changes, I think it boils down to, the company that you work for, it boils down to obviously the type of role that you have. And even as you just pointed out, a CISO role in one company can be completely different in another company. And then again, completely different from, a third company. So I think when it comes down to the implications, you also then have to look at it from the maturity of the person in role, the emotional capabilities of the person in role. And one of the things I've really been exploring a lot over my past sort of year and a half, just over a year and a half now being in this role, is how much sort of emotional toll there is to the whole thing.
Totally get that. I think we talked about the responsibility and is it changing and what the emphases are on now. And I do actually see that role changing. See it being a lot more emphasis on being an advisor, building relationships, engaging a business. So we've moved away from technical security aspects. Yes, it's still a really important part of the job, and there's a level of understanding that needs to be there in an individual. But certainly I can see it actually moving through risk regulation, and Becky mentioned it's about company culture. I have to see where does that sit, and actually see that it's a shared responsibility, and we see us being more advisory aspects and SMEs to a business.
Thanks, Lorraine. That's really useful. John, from a DPO perspective, are the responsibilities different? Is it an easier job? Is it a harder job?
I think a big difference, at least within the European framework, is that the DPO is now a statutory role, that GDPR actually creates the need for certain organizations to appoint a DPO and sets out tasks and also sets out obligations on an employer about the position. When GDPR came out in draft, I remember pronouncing on social media that data protection officers, your time has come, because you look at some of the wording of GDPR and it does make it sound like the DPO had been elevated to a real position of importance. Realistically speaking, on the ground, I haven't seen that in the way I thought it might be 4 or 5 years ago. I think one thing I will say, that there are real differences, but DPOs and CISOs, or however you define them in those organizations that don't require a DPO, you're still going to need someone responsible for data protection compliance. And even if the information security person's got a different title, the two roles have got to talk to each other and they've got to work with each other.
Do you think that a CISO should be responsible almost outside the business in the way that we have to a point with the DPO, or we've seen with money laundering reporting officers, where there is a requirement to have that role and it has certain powers? Or is this just an ethics issue that is present in every role across a business?
Something does occur to me. I've been thinking about this in advance of the call. Bearing in mind all the time that GDPR is not solely an information security piece of legislation, but it does have specific obligations. Article 32 in particular sort of lays out what sort of appropriate measures should be in place to protect personal data anyway. And what I've been thinking about is Article 40 of GDPR encourages or creates the opportunity for codes of conduct, and they can be sectoral codes of conduct. And indeed, it actually talks about, a code of conduct that can be drawn up by associations and other bodies representing categories of controllers and having regard to, for instance, the security measures in Article 32. I've been thinking about it from a DPO point of view, that I think there's possibly a real call for and I'm saying this in my role as chair of NADPO, that I think we should be preparing a code of conduct which would be given to the ICO for approval. But similarly, I wonder if information security practitioners have thought about that sort of code of conduct. And I guess I'm here. I am taking over and asking questions to the other panelists.
Carry on, carry on. But Becky, Lorraine, any thoughts on that?
Well, what I heard is he's trying to take your job, Joe. So I just, watch out.
Not the first time.
You're welcome to it, please.
It's definitely something I've engaged in similar conversations, particularly over the last few years, as we've seen a huge reliance come around, on security in corporations. And again, I guess to add to that, you're starting to see security raised up more and more as a board level event. And from what I understand, there's even companies that are looking at having CISOs, act as part of the board. So I've heard of a couple of companies where they've elevated a CISO position to a board member position, so they're including them in all of those conversations. I also definitely am seeing more and more requests, for CISO-led security information being present at board level events, so that the board is asking for and demanding those updates, and they're demanding them with a greater frequency than they ever have in the past.
Any thoughts, Lorraine?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would like to see it as a level of recognised profession. I think it's got enough standing and background behind it now. Yes, it was very much associated to information technology in the past, and it grew from that, and the IT security elements now, which I sort of badge now as just good hygiene. So, what we used to have is IT security is now what we're calling just good hygiene. And I think what we're looking at, taking that aspect now, and it's moving into cyber security and the digitized, the malware side of it, only driven sort of elements of the information security and cyber security side. So I definitely would like to see it as a definite profession. Yes, we can see it can fall out of also many bits, and the reason why I would like for it to come out is because I think then that will allow it to be seen by other people not in this industry, that they've got opportunity to come into these roles, and they've got opportunity because it is about security, it's about risk, it's about assessment, intelligence. There's so many facets to information security, and currently I think it's seen as driven up from a technology. I don't know computers, therefore I can't do information security. And there's so much else around it. And I think if we did have this as a dedicated profession, which is then seen, with all the, we've got the certifications and other things we can attach to it, but if we can see it definitely, I think it allows us to maybe approach some of the other skills gap issues that we have, and getting more talent in and getting diverse talent in, and people who would never have thought about information security actually seeing it as an open door and not necessarily a true technical environment.
I think that's a very good point. And I think but professionalisation would be, I think, definitely welcomed. One of the things we are seeing more and more, we've dealt with a few of these incidents ourselves, and I'm sure you have as well, is where you end up with this situation saying, hey, someone contacts you, hey, I'm a security researcher, in air quotes or not, depending on the situation. I found X, Y, or Z. Would you like me to report this to, and would you like to pay me a bug bounty? Or sometimes we see it being slightly more blatant, and I found X, would you like me to go away and please pay me? This kind of, in some ways is at the heart of the indictment we're seeing in the US. And I'd be interested to hear kind of from your different thoughts on that, how you think these issues should be handled, what happens when that kind of stuff comes across your desk, and then and perhaps where it's been mishandled. So yeah, I'd be keen to hear your views.
I can certainly kick that off with I guess how I've seen it handled over the last few years in particular. And again, it's something that has increased, over the last few years, as we've seen the bug bounties pay off for individuals, and as social media exposure to those payoffs has, I think, led to this perception of, hey, I could turn this into a lucrative career almost. I'm gonna make thousands, potentially millions, by going and finding and exploiting these issues, and then raising them up and asking for, demanding payment, to your point. So I would say about the last 5 years of my career in particular, I've seen where companies are having to come up with and create processes, and even policy around, hey, how do we handle this stuff? what does the company, what's the company stance? What's our corporate stance on what we do with these kind of requests? Do we pay bug bounties? Do we not pay bug bounties? And you see this now across the board, right? I mean, big companies, I think, absolutely have this, but it's gotten to the point now where even smaller companies are having to take a stance on what they do about it. And then it boils down to, you'll see someone report something that might actually be a lower priority type of issue in the grand scheme of things. They'll report that and raise that up. And then, like you said, hey, we're going to go public with it if you don't pay us off. You have to figure out still how to handle that, right? But at the same time, it's like, we're not going to pay you, buddy. This is the lowest priority on our list of raging fires right now. And so it's, again, trying to handle sort of that response with the individual, knowing that you potentially have a reputational issue to take care of, simultaneously, balancing that with the day-to-day business of prioritizing and running with, potentially much larger risks.
Lorraine and John, any thoughts on kind of handling these things, and any examples of good and bad you've seen?
I think handling it, if you don't have a bounty program, and there's a lot of companies out there that will advertise that they do have one and how to contact and where to go, etc., and they promote that aspect. There's many companies that don't have a bounty program, and therefore aren't, because it's seen as Becky commented on about the business appetite for it. By having one, you're maybe encouraging people to come and impact and try and test your site. If you're not a service provider or something that really focuses and relies on that capability being tight and a service, then you might not want to advertise having a bounty program. But I do feel it's really important from an internal perspective to actually have something in place, so when someone calls up, and it's about making sure you've got a consolidated process that can funnel those points in, and actually where you can make a genuine assessment as to whether it's something, to your point before, should I worry about this? Do I know about it already? Is it something that I'm just thinking, yeah, I know about that, thank you very much. But certainly I do feel that if you don't have that internal process, regardless of whether you sponsor a program or not, you'll get caught short, and the reputational embarrassment in public, because they will expose it, they'll put it on social media somewhere, and you just have to worry about whether you care about that enough. And then that vulnerability is now available to everyone else, and they'll all have a go.
Yeah, well, I think this is one of those areas which kind of exemplifies the need for the InfoSec and the data people to work together, because of course, under GDPR we have mandatory breach notification. It's vitally important to understand, for a company to understand what a personal data breach is under GDPR, and whether the breach notification obligations apply. Because what GDPR says is, even if you're faultless, even if this is 0 day, otherwise you're absolutely perfect, if you have a notifiable breach, you've got to notify. It doesn't say you've done wrong. It's a neutral act of notification, but as you and I know especially, it can have real implications down the road, because you're often faced with, especially if it becomes public, if you notify data subjects, you can be faced with claims, complaints for months and months afterwards. So I think this is really an area where the CISO and the CISO team have got to be talking to the data protection people. And it's I think the thing with bug bounty that concerns me, and I think your use of the word ethics was great as a way of introducing this. It concerns me that some organizations might pay a bounty and not make a notification in circumstances where they should do. As yet, we've not seen a huge amount of enforcement around that sort of thing. But I think that's the sort of thing that the regulators, the data protection regulators, will look very askance at if people are paying off in order not to make a legal notification.
Just to wrap up, so thank you to all of the panelists for your time today. It's been fantastic. Lorraine, I'm going to take away the shared responsibility model. I really like the fact that this is everybody's problem, and therefore the implications are of everybody. Becky, great to chat around some of the fact it depends, which I have. I'm going to get myself a T-shirt with that now, and how to deal with some of these issues and the responsibility. And John, thank you very much for giving us some insight into the data protection side of these things and what the implications are. So again, thank you all very much for joining us.